The restaurant's low murmur of conversation faded when the sound of breaking glass echoed through the air. All heads turned toward the corner booth, where a man in a dark tailored suit sat, his jaw tight, his fist still trembling from the force that had made the glasses jump. Andrew Valentini was known by many names in Boston: businessman, philanthropist, protector. But everyone in that room knew the truth. He was the man you never crossed, the storm that destroyed without warning. And tonight, someone had done the unthinkable. A young waitress stood before him, holding a small notepad against her chest. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, as she explained that his preferred table was already reserved. "If you wait 15 minutes, I can... Restauranto." His voice, rich and commanding, cut through the room. The word cracked like thunder, silencing forks mid-air. His eyes were sharp and cold, the blue of a winter sea. "Do you know who I am?" Whispers spread like smoke. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone except the girl who now faced him without lowering her gaze. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, her tone steady despite the tremor running through the room. "All our tables are full tonight." Andrew's lip curled. He muttered a string of Italian insults under his breath, quick, biting words laced with contempt. The rhythm of his speech was fluent, practiced. His men at nearby tables exchanged amused glances, certain she had no idea what he was saying. But the girl didn't flinch. She listened. Her green eyes flickered, sharp, attentive. Then something shifted behind them. When he finally paused, she leaned slightly forward. "Capisco perfettamente," she said in flawless Italian. Her voice carried through the restaurant like a soft bell. "E ho capito ogni parola che hai detto." "I understand perfectly, and I understood every word you said." For a heartbeat, time stopped. Andrew's men froze mid-breath. The wine glasses trembled again, not from motion this time, but from the tension that filled the air. Claire Montgomery's accent was precise, her tone refined, the kind only someone born into language and culture could produce. She continued, her words calm but sharp as glass. "You insulted my manners, my intelligence, and my place of work. But I assure you, signore, my patience is not infinite. You can wait 15 minutes like everyone else, or I will happily direct you to another restaurant." The audacity stunned him. No one, no rival, no associate, had ever spoken to him that way. For a moment his eyes darkened, and his men tensed, hands shifting beneath their jackets. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of Andrew's mouth curved slightly, a flicker of surprise breaking through the mask of power. He studied her, really looked at her. The freckles across her nose, the steady rise and fall of her breath, the way she stood rooted, calm but alert, like someone who'd seen worse storms than this one. "What's your name?" His voice had softened, lower now, carrying an unfamiliar note, curiosity. "Claire," she said, refusing to give her last name. "Claire," he repeated, testing the sound. "Who taught you to speak like that?" "My grandmother," she replied, not blinking. "She was from Florence." A beat of silence followed, electric and unspoken. Around them, the restaurant exhaled collectively as Andrew pushed his chair back. His expression was unreadable as he rose to his full height, the room shrinking under the weight of his presence. "The bar will be fine," he said at last, voice smooth again, dangerous only in how controlled it had become. "Bring me your best scotch. Neat." She nodded once and turned, her spine straight, her steps measured. Only when she reached the bar did she allow herself to exhale. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the bottle, the echo of adrenaline still humming in her veins. From his new seat, Andrew watched her. The tension in his shoulders had not entirely faded, but something inside him had shifted. The fury that had driven him moments ago was replaced by a slow, strange fascination. When she finally brought his drink, he placed a crisp 100 beneath the glass and slid a card toward her, black, heavy, embossed in gold. "My apologies for earlier," he said quietly, "and my gratitude for the lesson." She glanced at the card, the name printed in elegant serif letters. Andrew Valentini. As she turned away, the faintest smile tugged at her lips. The most feared man in Boston had just apologized to a waitress. And for the first time in years, he left a place not in anger, but in awe. The rain fell in thin silver lines that morning, painting the city in shades of quiet gray. Claire Montgomery hurried across the street, her coat clinging to her as she pushed through the door of her favorite cafe. The scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her like warmth after a long night. Her hair was damp, her thoughts restless from grading papers and restless dreams. She wanted silence, but fate had other plans. Was there, sitting by the window like a dark reflection against the glass, Andrew Valentini, the man whose temper had once frozen an entire restaurant, the same man who had handed her a gold card with an apology instead of a threat. Now he sat alone, a cup of untouched espresso before him, and a notebook open filled with neat, precise handwriting. Their eyes met for the first time since that night. Her steps faltered, and she felt every gaze in the cafe shift toward them. Andrew gestured toward the empty chair across from him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Claire considered walking away, but curiosity overpowered fear. She crossed the room and sat down, her heart drumming softly beneath her ribs. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Andrew's smile was faint, almost human. "This building is mine," he said simply. "I come here when I need to think." Claire looked around at the small shop, realizing the unspoken truth. His reach extended everywhere. For a few moments they sat in silence. The sound of rain against the window filled the space between them. Andrew's fingers traced the edge of his cup, a small motion that betrayed restlessness. "You look different today," she said quietly. "Less dangerous." Maybe he lifted his gaze, and for the first time she saw something behind his cold blue eyes' weariness. "You stood up to me," he said. "Most people run when I get angry. Why didn't you?" Claire smiled softly. "Because my father taught me that fear is just curiosity waiting to find its voice." She said, "I've always been too curious for my own good." That made Andrew laugh. It wasn't the sharp laugh of a man used to control. It was real and disarming. "Your father must have been a strong man," Andrew said. "He was," she replied, "but strength didn't save him." Silence settled again, like mist between them. Andrew studied her face, searching for something she wasn't ready to name yet. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded napkin, and placed it on. The table inside was a small handwritten quote in Italian, "The love that moves the sun and the other stars." Claire's breath caught Dante. She whispered, "You know your classics." He shrugged. "My grandmother used to read him to me when I was a child." Before my family became what it is now, the cafe suddenly felt smaller as their worlds brushed dangerously close together. A waitress passed by, refilling cups, whispering nervously when she recognized Andrew. Claire ignored it. She was too busy watching. The man across from her? The contradiction of danger and sadness wrapped in a single body, outside thunder rolled through the sky. Andrew leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There are things about me you shouldn't try to understand. Claire, I don't live in the same world you do." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Maybe that's why you came here," she said softly. "Because some part of you wants to." He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to walk away or tell the truth. Finally, he spoke, in a tone that carried both warning and confession. "I'm not used to people talking to me without fear. You confuse me, Claire. And that's not a safe thing to do." Her heart raced at his words. The way he said her name felt like a promise and a threat, all at once. But instead of retreating, she leaned forward slightly. "Maybe I like dangerous conversations," she said. The flicker of surprise in his eyes told her she had crossed a line. Andrew stood pushing the chair back with quiet restraint. He placed a few bills on the table, enough to pay for both drinks and more. He looked down at her one last time before walking toward the door. When he stepped outside, the rain hit him like glass, and Claire watched through the window as he paused under the awning, staring out at the gray street. He looked like a man at war with himself. And she knew somehow this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something neither of them could stop. The restaurant lights glowed like soft embers that evening, painting golden reflections on the glasses and marble tables. Claire hesitated at the entrance, her emerald dress clinging slightly from the drizzle outside. Her pulse quickened when she saw him seated at the far corner, away from the windows, Andrew Valentini. The man who had both terrified and fascinated her since the night he slammed his fist on that wooden table. He looked different tonight, calmer, sharper, the kind of calm that felt like quiet before thunder. He stood when he saw her, his eyes scanning her with a flicker of something she couldn't name. "You came," he said, his tone low, but softer than before. "I said I would." She answered, though. Part of her still wondered why. She hadn't changed her mind. He gestured for her to sit. The air around him carried power, unspoken and heavy. Yet when he looked at her, something gentler surfaced, as if she was the first person in years who saw him not as a legend, but as a man in tow. Ordered wine without needing menus. He knew the owner, the waiters, even the silence seemed to bend around him. The conversation began light music, food travel, then slowly slipped into shadows. She asked him if people feared him. He swirled his wine, staring into the red swirl. "Fear creates distance," he said, "and distance keeps me alive." She held his gaze. "Does it ever make you lonely?" He didn't answer. Immediately just looked at her as if she had touched a wound. He didn't want anyone to see. The waiter arrived, setting their meals down with trembling hands. Everyone in the room knew who Andrew was. They also knew not to meet his eyes. But Claire wasn't everyone. She spoke to him like a mirror, without fear or flattery. He told her about Florence, his grandmother, the poetry she used to recite. She told him about her students, about how she found meaning in language when life made no sense. Their words built a strange bridge between two worlds that should never have met. For a moment it almost felt normal, until Andrew's phone buzzed against the table. The light on the screen flashed a name that made his expression change. His hand tightened around the glass before he silenced it. Claire noticed the flicker in his eyes, that brief transformation, from man to something darker. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. He forced a smile. "Just business." But his men at the bar had straightened their posture, and their eyes now scanned the entrance. The noise in the restaurant dimmed as tension thickened, like smoke. Andrew's jaw locked. He leaned forward, speaking in a voice only she could hear. "If anything happens, don't look back. Do you understand?" Claire frowned. "What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, the front door opened sharply, letting in 3 men in dark coats. Their eyes swept the room too quickly, their presence wrong, too precise. Andrew's men rose almost in unison, the air shifting from warmth to danger. Claire's heart pounded as she realized she was sitting in the middle of something she didn't understand. One of the newcomers reached inside his coat, and the world exploded in movement. Shouts, tables overturning. Andrew grabbed Claire's wrist, pulling her down behind the booth as glass shattered around them. "Get down," he ordered, the calm authority of command cutting through the chaos. She obeyed, her breath shaking as bullets cracked against the walls. It lasted seconds, maybe minutes, until silence returned. broken only by the ringing in her ears. When she looked up, she saw 2 of the attackers on the ground, and Andrew standing above them, weapons still in hand. The other men already gone. The restaurant was a ruin, and yet his expression wasn't rage. It was control. Precise, cold, control. He turned to her, his voice low. "I told you my world isn't safe." She stood slowly trembling, but refused to look away from him. Outside sirens began to wail in the distance. He reached for her coat, handed it to her, his touch brief, but steady. "I'll take you home," he said. She should have refused, should have run, but she followed him out into the night. The rain washed blood from the pavement as they stepped into the waiting car. Her mind screamed to leave, but her heart whispered something she couldn't deny. The most dangerous man in Boston had just risked his life for her, and she didn't know why. The night air was thick with rain, and the sharp scent of gunpowder echoing through narrow Boston streets. The sound of sirens grew louder behind them as Andrew pulled Claire through the dark alley, his hand firm around hers. The rain soaked them both, but neither slowed down. His men followed close, scanning every corner, their voices low and urgent. "Move now, before they circle back," Andrew ordered. The car waited at the far end engine, still running headlights off, a black shadow waiting for its master. Claire stumbled, her heels slipping on wet stone. She caught herself against the wall, gasping for breath. "What just happened?" she demanded, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. Andrew turned, his face pale under the streetlight, his hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were steady, though tired. "They came for me, not you," he said. "I didn't expect them to be that bold. Not here. Not tonight." He helped her into the car and slammed the door behind her. The vehicle sped off, cutting through the rain. Like a ghost inside, silence hung between them. The city lights flashed over their faces in quick bursts, revealing more than words could say. Claire's hands were shaking. She clenched them in her lap. "Why did you take me with you?" she asked. "Because if they realized who you were, they wouldn't stop until they used you against me," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have been there. Claire, I didn't want you in that crossfire." His tone was cold, but beneath it was something that sounded like guilt. The car climbed a steep road leading to the north side of the city, where the skyline opened to the harbor. Andrew's penthouse waited there, a fortress of glass and steel. They entered through the private elevator, his security team already in motion, checking perimeter feeds and coded locks. The room was dark except for the city lights spreading across the water like fireflies. Claire stood near the window, dripping water onto the polished floor. She didn't turn to face him. "You kill people for a living, don't you?" she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. His jacket landed on the couch, his shoulders heavy with the weight of too many secrets. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no defense. "Only when necessary," he said. She turned, then her eyes fierce and bright. "Necessary for who?" Andrew looked at her, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. "My family built this city's bones," he said. "My father made enemies. I inherited all of them. You can't just walk away from that." Claire crossed the room slowly until she stood a few feet from him. Her voice dropped. "You're powerful enough to change anything if you really wanted to. Why stay in a world that poisons you?" His gaze locked on hers. "Because it's the only world I know." She didn't look away, not even when thunder shook the glass behind her. "Then learn another one," she said softly before she realized how much truth was in those words. Something flickered across his expression, a crack in the armor he always wore. For a brief heartbeat, he wasn't the Mafia boss commanding a city, but a man tired of the blood that followed him. He stepped closer, his voice low. Do you know what it means to trust someone like me? Claire shook her head. No, but I think you want to. He almost smiled, but there was sadness in it too. Maybe in another life, he murmured, but this one is already written. The moment was shattered by the sharp buzz of his phone. Andrew froze, reading the message on the screen. His face turned hard again. He handed the phone to his lieutenant nearby. Get the team ready. We move in 20 minutes. He turned back to Claire. The Calabresi. Family won't stop after tonight. They'll come again harder next time. You'll stay here until I deal with it. She took a step toward him, her voice rising. Deal with it means kill them, doesn't it? He didn't answer, and that silence was the truth. Lightning lit the sky as he walked to the door, his outline framed against the city's glow. She called after him. Andrew, what if you don't come back? He paused without turning. Then don't wait for me, he said, and disappeared into the elevator. Hours passed before she could breathe normally again. Rain lashed the glass, and every distant siren made her flinch. She stood by the window, staring at the harbor below, wondering what kind of man risked his life to protect a woman he barely knew, and in that moment she realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what she felt when he walked away. The storm had passed by morning, but the city still smelled of rain and smoke. Claire woke on the couch, her clothes still damp from the night before. The silence of the penthouse was heavy, too perfect, too clean. She stood and looked around, trying to make sense of where she was. The view of the harbor glimmered in pale gray light, reminding her she was standing in the home of the most feared man in Boston. The man who had walked into the night with a gun and a promise. She found a clean shirt, folded on the table beside a cup of untouched coffee still warm. His men had been there and left quietly. She changed her clothes and poured the coffee, trying to calm the shaking in her hands. Then she saw it, a folded letter left beside the cup, her name written in his elegant handwriting. She hesitated before opening it. The note was short. Don't leave the building, I'll send for you when it's safe. A safe. The word felt strange now. Nothing about Andrew Valentini's world was safe. She walked to the window, watching boats drift lazily across the water, wondering if one of them carried the man who had turned her world upside down. Hours passed, and then the elevator chimed. She turned sharply, ready to hide, but it was him. He stepped out, wearing a dark coat streaked with rain, and blood splattered faintly across his sleeve. He looked exhausted, but alive. His men lingered outside the door as he poured himself a drink. His eyes met hers, and for a moment they said nothing. You shouldn't have seen that last night, he said quietly. You shouldn't be here at all. Then why am I? She asked. Because I couldn't let them hurt you. Claire walked closer, her heart beating too fast. You live in a world where hurting people is how you survive. She paused, studying his face. Tell me, Andrew, how did you become this? His jaw tightened. The same way every monster begins, he said softly, by thinking I was saving someone. He turned toward the window, staring at the gray horizon. When I was 20, my father was killed in front of me. My family's enemies came for us that night. I took what was left and built something no one could destroy. I promised myself no one I cared about would ever be that helpless again. Claire's anger faltered, replaced by something deeper, something dangerously close to understanding. You built an empire out of fear, she said, and it worked, but now it's destroying you. He turned sharply, his voice rising. You think I don't know that? Every night I wonder if the next bullet is mine or if it will hit someone I love. The silence that followed was raw. The truth between them had been stripped bare. He moved closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath. I don't know what this is, he said quietly, but You make me remember things I've tried to forget. He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. Then the moment shattered. His phone buzzed again. He answered, his voice hardening. What? No, not her. His expression changed completely. His men tensed. Claire's chest tightened. What is it? She asked. He turned his eyes cold and dangerous. The Calabrazzi family found out who you are. They know where you teach. Claire froze, fear crawling up her spine. How they've been following you for weeks, he said, low and furious. They know your schedule, your apartment, your mother's address. Her legs weakened. She grabbed the edge of the table for balance. Andrew crossed the space and caught her shoulders. His voice was firm. Listen to me. You'll leave the city tonight. My men will take you somewhere safe. She shook her head. I won't run. Andrew, they'll just find you again. He held her gaze. No, they'll find me. They already have. For the first time she saw fear in him, not for himself, but for her. His voice broke slightly as he said the words that didn't sound like a choice. This ends now. I'll fix it even if it kills me. Claire whispered. You can't fix violence with more violence. Andrew, he leaned in, closed his eyes, burning with something between desperation and love. Then tell me another way, Claire. Tell me how to save you without becoming everything you hate. She had no answer, only the sound of rain starting again against the glass. He turned toward the door, already giving orders to his men. When he looked back, his expression was softer. I'll send someone for you at dawn. If I don't come back, forget I ever existed. The door shut behind him, and the room fell silent. The city below flickered, with distant lights and sirens. Somewhere out there, Andrew Valentini was walking into the fire alone, and Claire realized too late that she was already in love with the man everyone else feared. The world outside Andrew's penthouse had grown colder, as autumn slipped into winter. But inside Claire's life felt like it had frozen completely. She had spent the last 3 days confined to the towering glass fortress, unable to leave without permission. His men guarded the entrance like shadows, and the silence between her and Andrew stretched tighter each night. She watched him from across the room as he made call after call, his tone always low and dangerous. His men came and went, bringing files, blueprints, and faces filled with worry. She could tell something big was coming, but no one dared explain what the Calabrazzi family had crossed a line, and Andrew was planning something that even his own men whispered about in fear. That night the city glowed below them in streaks of gold and gray. Claire couldn't sleep. The sound of rain hitting the windows reminded her of that first night when everything changed. She moved quietly to the living room, but stopped when she heard voices. Andrew's voice, and another rougher, lower. Carlos. His lieutenant leaned against the bar pouring whiskey. The woman is your weakness, Carlos said evenly. They know it. She's a teacher, not a soldier. You bring her into this. She'll die. Andrew's tone cut through the air colder than steel. You think? I don't know that she shouldn't even be here, but the Calabrazzis already have her photo and her mother's address. I can't disappear her forever. Carlos, I need to end this. You mean start a war, Carlos said. Andrew slammed his glass onto the counter. The sound cracked through the silence. Then so be it. Claire's heart pounded. She pressed her back against the wall, listening as the two men lowered their voices again. She had suspected he was planning something, but now it was real. He was, preparing to destroy an entire family for her. The next morning she found him standing by the window, staring out over the harbor. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and there were bruises along his knuckles. He didn't turn when he spoke. You shouldn't have been awake last night. He knew she'd overheard. "You're going to start a war because of me," she said quietly. He turned his head, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to finish one," he corrected. She walked closer until she was beside him. "You think killing them will protect me, but it won't. It'll only make you the monster. They already think you are." He finally looked at her, his eyes colder than she had ever seen. "I became that monster a long time ago, Claire. The difference now is, I'm doing it for something that matters." She felt anger and heartbreak twist together inside her. "You don't understand," she said. "You can't save someone by destroying yourself." He reached out, catching her wrist before she could pull away. His grip was strong, but not cruel. His voice softened. "I already made my choice the night I met you. I stopped being untouchable that day, and now I have to deal with it." Later that day, she found a small metal briefcase left on the desk. Curiosity pushed her to open it. Inside were photos, documents, and a map marked with red circles all over Boston. A list of names including police officers, judges, and politicians. The Calabrazzi family wasn't just a rival. They were inside everything. Her breath caught when she saw another file. Her own name printed across the top, followed by details she had never given anyone: her mother's rehabilitation clinic, her university schedule, her bank records. Andrew had known everything about her before he ever walked into that restaurant. When he returned, she confronted him holding the file in shaking hands. "You investigated me before we even met." "Why?" He looked at the folder, then at her. "Because I had to know if you were real," he said softly. "Everyone lies to me, Claire. I needed to be sure you weren't just another trap." Her anger wavered under the weight of his confession. "You don't need to protect me," she said. "You need to protect yourself." He smiled faintly. "There's no difference anymore." Outside thunder rolled again, echoing across the harbor. He walked to the door, giving one last order to his men before leaving. "The next time you see me, this will be over." The door closed, and Claire stood alone, surrounded by files, maps, and secrets she was never supposed to see. She looked out at the storm, realizing that whatever Andrew was about to do, it wasn't just for survival. It was for love. And love mixed with power was always the most dangerous thing in the world. The meeting was set for midnight in an abandoned warehouse near the Boston docks. The air smelled of salt and oil, and the sound of waves slapping against the pier echoed like the ticking of a clock. Outside, unmarked cars waited in the shadows' engines, running windows tinted. Andrew Valentini stepped out of his black sedan, the hem of his coat brushing the puddles beneath him. His men moved ahead, sweeping the area, but he didn't need them to tell him what he already knew. The Calabrazzi family was too close. Inside the warehouse, dim lights flickered over long wooden tables covered in old blueprints and ashtrays. The heads of 3 allied families waited, already seated, when Andrew walked in. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He took his seat at the head of the table. His presence enough to silence even the boldest of them. "You called this meeting," one of the men said, tapping a ringed finger against the table. "What's this about?" Andrew leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying a dangerous edge. "The Calabrazzi family has broken every agreement we ever made. They touched my people. They followed a woman under my protection. That ends tonight." The others exchanged looks, cautious, suspicious. No one protected, outsiders in their world. "A woman," one of them asked. "What makes her worth starting a war over?" Andrew's gaze darkened. "Because she's mine," he said simply. At that moment, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Shadows shifted. Near the far door, Andrew's hand went to his gun before he even turned. His men moved instantly, forming a line near the entrance. Then the door burst open and a figure stumbled in. It was Carlos, his lieutenant blood staining his sleeve. They were waiting, he said, breathless. It's a setup. Andrew. The next seconds happened in flashes. The lights went out. Gunfire exploded across the room. Sparks lit the walls as bullets ricocheted. Men shouted, ducked, ran. Smoke filled the air, and the smell of metal and blood grew thick. Andrew grabbed Carlos, dragging him behind a steel column, as he fired back toward the figures moving in the dark. One by one, the Calabrazzi assassins fell, but there were too many. We need to get out, Carlos said, clutching his arm. Andrew shook his head, his eyes blazing. No. This ends now. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small device, a detonator. Carlos froze. You're not serious. Andrew looked at him. Dead serious. The files are already in federal hands. The evidence. The names, everything. I've spent months preparing this. The Calabrazzi family falls tonight. Carlos stared at him, realizing what he was hearing. You planned this all along, didn't you? Andrew gave a faint smile. I told you once, the only way to escape hell is to burn it down. He pressed the button, and the sound that followed was unlike anything Carlos had ever heard. The ground shook. Windows, shattered fire roared through the old wooden beams. The roof collapsed in a storm of glass and flame. Andrew shoved Carlos toward the exit before the blast could swallow them both. Go! He shouted. I'll cover you. Carlos stumbled out into the cold night, coughing as smoke poured from the building. Behind him, the structure erupted in fire, lighting up the harbor. In shades of orange and red, Andrew was still inside. The explosion was heard miles away. Sirens wailed as emergency crews rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left of the warehouse but twisted steel and black ash hours. Later news spread across the city. Boston's crime king, Andrew Valentini, was dead. Police sources confirmed no survivors were found among the ruins. Reporters called it the end of an era, the fall of a dynasty. But those who truly knew him didn't believe it, not completely. Because 3 blocks away in the darkness of the docks, a black boat drifted quietly out to sea. On its deck, Carlos sat bruised and shaking, clutching a sealed envelope with Claire's name written across it. Inside was a single message written in Andrew's hand. Whatever you hear, don't believe it. Wait for me. And as the boat disappeared into the fog, the world mourned a dead man, while somewhere in the distance the storm he had started was only beginning. The news spread like wildfire across Boston. Every channel, every newspaper, every whispered conversation carried the same words. Mafia boss Andrew Valentini, dead in a fiery explosion. His empire dismantled his enemies, celebrating his ashes scattered across the harbor. Claire heard it all from the cabin, where she had been hiding far away from the city. The television flickered in the dim light, her reflection staring back pale and hollow. The reporter's voice was steady when she said, "No survivors were found." Claire switched off the screen and sat in silence. Her heart felt like it had stopped beating. It had been days since she heard from Andrew. She wanted to believe he was alive, but the world had already buried him. She stood by the window staring out at the endless forest, rain falling softly on the roof. The phone on the table remained silent until a knock broke. The quiet. Carlos stood outside, soaked to the bone, his face bruised and his eyes red. He held a small metal case and an envelope. He didn't speak for a long time when she opened the door. Finally, he whispered, "He told me to find you." She let him in, and he placed the case on the table. The fire from the fireplace flickered across his hands, trembling slightly. He opened the case, revealing files, documents, photos, and a small black drive. "He wanted you to have these," he said. His voice cracked halfway through. He said it would explain everything. Claire reached for the envelope. Her name written in Andrew's handwriting. The sight of it stole her breath. She opened it slowly, Inside was a single sheet of paper and 3 short sentences. Whatever you hear, don't believe it. Wait for Carlos. I love you. Her vision blurred, tears slipping down her face. Carlos handed her the drive. She plugged it into her laptop. The screen came alive with folders labeled Operations Evidence and one marked for Claire. She clicked it. The first file opened to a video. Andrew's face appeared pale lit, only by the light of a desk lamp. You're... Watching this, he began, his voice, calm but heavy with finality. Then it means I've done what I had to do. I couldn't destroy the Calabrazzi family with bullets. I had to bury them with truth. Every file here, every name, every account will be in the hands of the FBI by sunrise. They'll think I'm dead. Let them. It's the only way you'll ever be safe. He paused, his hand trembling slightly as he continued. You once asked me if I knew how to live without fear. The truth is, I never did until you. When you stood up to me that night, you changed everything. You made me see the man I could still be. If there's any justice in this world, we'll meet again, somewhere far from all this. The video ended, and the room felt too small, too quiet. Claire opened the other folders. Each contained evidence, years of records, bribes, contracts, murders, bank accounts. The Calabrazzi family wasn't just guilty. They were exposed completely. She realized Andrew had given up his empire, his name and his life for her. Carlos stepped forward. There's more, he said, sliding another folder toward her. It's about your father. Her breath caught. She opened it. The documents detailed an FBI case 8 years old. A familiar name stood out. Special Agent Jonathan Montgomery, her father. She read in silence, her hand shaking. The report revealed that her father hadn't been killed randomly. He had been targeted. The order had come directly from the Calabrazzi family, not Andrew's. It was revenge for an undercover operation. Her father had been investigating their human trafficking network when they discovered his cover. They made his death look like a mugging. Claire covered her mouth, unable to speak. Carlos lowered his head. Andrew found this months ago, he said. He didn't tell you, because he wanted to protect you. He found the men responsible and made sure they would never hurt anyone again. The truth hit her harder than any bullet could. Andrew had carried the guilt for her father's death all this time, even though he wasn't the one who ordered it. He had spent years fighting the same monsters that had destroyed her family. She sat in silence until dawn, staring at the flames dancing in the fireplace. The storm outside had eased, but inside her the tempest still raged. She replayed his message in her mind over and over, the last 3 words echoing through her soul. I love you. When the sun finally rose, Carlos handed her another paper. A map coordinates circled in red and a date 3 weeks from now. She looked at him confused. He said, You'd understand when the time came? He replied, as he left. She stood at the window, watching the mist roll across the trees. She felt the faintest flicker of hope deep inside. The man the world believed dead had left a trail. A promise. A heartbeat hidden beneath the ashes. And though fear whispered he was gone, her heart refused to believe it. She whispered into the dawn, Andrew, wherever you are, I'll find you. The road to Oregon stretched endlessly through fog and rain. Claire drove with trembling hands, the map Andrew had left spread open on the seat beside her. Each mile felt like a heartbeat, closer to something she couldn't name. Hope, fear, love maybe, all of it. The coordinates led her to the edge of the world, or so it felt. A narrow coastal road lined with wild cliffs and roaring waves. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, as if echoing her pulse. When she finally saw the cottage, it looked like something from a dream. Weathered wood and a chimney smoking gently against the gray sky. The wind howled through the trees as she stepped out her boots, sinking into the wet earth. She hesitated, hand hovering above the door, then knocked once, twice. The sound disappeared into the storm. The door opened slowly, and there he was. He stood in the doorway, alive, real breathing. His hair was longer, his face thinner, his eyes the same piercing blue that had once terrified an entire city, but now held only peace and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Andrew," she whispered. The name felt fragile on her lips, like something sacred. He smiled, a small, hesitant curve of the lips. "The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," he said, quietly trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Claire took a step forward, then another, until she stood inches from him. She raised her hand, as if afraid he might vanish. And when her fingers brushed his face, she felt the warmth, the pulse, the truth. Her knees weakened, and she pressed her forehead against his chest. The scent of salt and smoke, and the faint trace of the life he had escaped, filled her senses. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "I was," he said softly. "But not anymore." Inside the cottage, the fire burned low. Books covered the table, stacks of papers, maps, and a few photographs from their old lives now buried under new names. He handed her a cup of tea, his hands steady, though his eyes shimmered with everything left unsaid. How he survived became clear as he spoke. The explosion had been planned down to the last second. He had escaped through a maintenance tunnel seconds before the blast. Carlos had pulled him out to the docks, where a waiting boat carried him to the coast. The rest was careful silence, hidden identities, and the slow rebuilding of a man who no longer wanted to rule anything but his own peace. They sat for hours, their voices soft against the rain. She told him about the files about her father's case, about how everything connected. His jaw tightened when he heard the truth about her father's murder. "I knew they were responsible," he said quietly. "That's why I gave it all up. I couldn't destroy them without destroying myself." "You did destroy them," she said, her voice shaking. "You gave the FBI everything." Andrew looked into the fire. "No, Claire, I gave them the truth, and truth is more powerful than fear." As night fell, they walked outside to the cliff where the ocean stretched endlessly before them. The wind whipped through her hair as he turned to her. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. "I'm not Andrew Valentini anymore. The world buried that man." He reached into his coat and handed her new papers, a passport and an ID. "David Wells, professor of history, Pacific Northwest University." She laughed softly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A professor," she whispered. "You always did have a way with stories." He smiled, the kind of smile she had never seen from him before. "Not arrogant, not dangerous, just human. I want a life, Claire. A real one. No guards, no lies, no blood. Just mornings like this and nights like this, and maybe you if you'll stay." She looked at him. The man who had once ruled Boston's underworld, now asking for something as fragile as peace. Her heart answered before her voice did. She reached up, cupped his face, and whispered, "I already stayed the moment I walked through that door." They kissed under the storm, the ocean crashing below the sky, breaking open above them. Each wave seemed to carry away a piece of the past, leaving only the present raw and new. In that moment, the Mafia boss died completely, and the man he had buried for years was finally free. When they returned inside, Claire noticed a ring on the table, simple gold, no diamonds, no extravagance. She turned to him, and he said softly, "It belonged to my grandmother. She believed every man gets one chance to start over. I'd like this to be mine." She took his hand and slid the ring onto her finger. No vows, No promises, just the quiet understanding that they had already survived the impossible. Outside, the wind calmed, and the first light of dawn touched the ocean. For the first time in years, Claire Montgomery and the man once called Andrew Valentini stood side by side, not as a secret, not as a crime, but as a beginning. The morning sun spilled through the windows of the small coastal cottage, touching everything it could reach. Claire woke to the sound of waves and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the air. For a brief moment, she forgot who they used to be. There were no guns, no blood, no shadows. Just the sound of the ocean and Andrew humming quietly in the kitchen. His hair was still damp from the rain, and his sleeves rolled up, revealing faint scars that told a story he no longer needed to hide. She smiled, watching him pour 2 cups and place them on the table. He noticed her in the doorway and said softly, "Good morning, Professor." She laughed. "You know, that name still feels strange." He shrugged. "It suits you better than the woman who stood up to a Mafia boss in a restaurant." She stepped closer, teasing. "And it suits you better than the man who once terrified an entire city." He smiled, but behind his eyes, something flickered a storm she couldn't yet see. He handed her the cup and kissed her forehead. "I have something to show you," he said, and led her to the desk near the window. The papers spread. There weren't blueprints or ledgers this time. They were academic applications, letters from universities, and a small handwritten note from Carlos. Carlos's letter was short and direct. The plan worked. The Calabrazzi family has been dismantled completely. Their leaders are in federal custody and the rest scattered. The government used Andrew's files to wipe corruption from half the city. The Valentini name is gone, but the foundation he created in his grandmother's honor has started operations. It funds schools for children affected by crime, victims of violence and their families. Claire looked at him, eyes wide. "You rebuilt everything." He nodded. Only this time without fear, but the piece they had built was fragile. A knock echoed through the cottage door. 3 sharp raps that cut through the calm. Claire froze. Andrew placed his cup down quietly and reached for the pistol he still kept under the shelf. His instincts never truly died. He opened the door slowly to reveal Carlos standing there, soaked from the rain, his face pale with exhaustion. "We have a problem," he said, his voice low. Claire's stomach tightened. "What happened?" Carlos looked at Andrew. "The FBI knows you're alive. A photo of you leaving the docks surfaced last week. Someone recognized you. They're reopening the case." Andrew's face hardened. "How long before they find us?" Carlos shook his head. "Days, maybe less. They think you disappeared with Calabrazzi's money. They want you in custody." For a moment, no one spoke. The waves outside crashed harder against the cliffs. Andrew turned away, staring out the window. Then he said quietly, "I'm done running." Claire stepped forward. "No," she said firmly. "You're done hiding. There's a difference." He looked at her, her green eyes filled with a courage that had once disarmed him more than any gun. Carlos hesitated, then placed a folder on the table. "It's all here," he said. "The immunity deal, the one the FBI offered. If you turned over everything, they filed it after your death. It's still valid." Claire opened the folder. Inside was the document signed, sealed and dated. One signature stood out, the United States Department of Justice. She looked up, confused. He could walk. Free Andrew stared at the paper as if it were a ghost. He could end this. Finally, he took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "If I go back, I lose this life. If I stay, we live as ghosts forever." She reached for his hand. Her voice was steady. "Then choose what you couldn't before. Choose to live, not to survive." He held her hand tight, then smiled for the first time without fear. The next morning, they drove into Portland fog, curling around the streets like a curtain. Carlos dropped them off at the Federal Building and drove away without a word. Inside the lobby, Andrew walked up to the counter and handed the file to the agent. Behind the glass. "My name is Andrew Valentini," he said. "I think you've been looking for me." It took hours. The interrogation, the verification, the endless signatures. When they finally walked out, the sun was setting, streaks of orange and gold spreading. Over the water, the FBI had accepted the immunity papers. The Valentini empire was legally dissolved, and Andrew was now officially David Wells again. A free man. As they stood by the harbor, Claire turned to him. So what now? He looked at her with a smile that reached his eyes. "Now we live." He took her hand, and together they walked down the pier, watching seagulls wheel across the horizon. Months later, their life settled into rhythm. He taught history at the university. She continued her lectures on Italian literature. Their names were different, but their hearts carried everything they had survived. One evening after class, he waited for her by the library garden. The sky was soft with the colors of twilight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. She laughed through tears. "You're serious?" He nodded, opening it. Inside was the same gold ring that once lay on the cottage table, but this time engraved with new words. Ti amo sempre. They married quietly on the cliffs behind the cottage, only the wind and ocean as witnesses. Their lives were no longer built on fear, but on the quiet beauty of starting over. Years later, as waves crashed against the shore, Claire stood on the porch watching Andrew teach their daughter how to fly a kite. The girl's laughter echoed through the salt air, and for the first time, Claire understood what peace really sounded like. She looked at the man who had once been a legend of power, and now was simply her husband. The world had buried Andrew Valentini, but in his place a better man had risen, one who proved that even the darkest souls could find light again. And as the wind swept across the sea carrying the scent of salt and freedom, Claire whispered the words she had waited years to say. "We made it, Andrew, we're finally free."